Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host, Jace, joined by Rocky from Comic Boom. Rocky, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome, man. Thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure reviewing great comic books with you, and we got another good one to review tonight.
Yeah, we weren't necessarily planning on reviewing all these Scott-tober titles, as Comixology is calling it, uh, with Scott Snyder and various collaborators putting out a new comic the first three Tuesdays of October, but they're just so good. We're excited to talk about them. So the book that came out this week, and again, this is going to have full spoilers, everybody. So if you haven't checked it out and you're planning on it, you may want to go back and get the book first, read it, and then come back and listen. Or you can go check out our new comic book Wednesday episode where I talk about Clear with a spoiler-free review. But we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it here. So it's written by Scott Snyder, as I mentioned. His collaborator on this particular title is Francis Manapul, who does the art and the colors. And just a real quick reminder, these are eventually going to be in print from Dark Horse, but right now they're just being released digitally through Comixology. There's three ways you can get them. If you are an Amazon Prime member, you can get them for free. Just do a search for Clear Comixology. It'll come up. You can click on it, read it right there in the browser. If you are a member of Comixology Unlimited, you have full access to all the Comixology originals. Or the third way you can do it is you can just go to Amazon, search for Clear Comixology, and just buy the individual issue. Now, you probably are gonna have a better time if you get the subscription. The subscription is $8.99 as opposed to paying $4.99 for the single book. You pay $8.99. Not only do you get all the Scott Tober books, you get all the Amazon originals plus all their other library, DC, Marvel, Image, all the other stuff that they have on there. It's thousands and thousands of books. So, subscription model, a little bit more bang for your buck. So, anyway, that's how you get them. If you haven't read Clear and you plan on it, don't want to be spoiled, hit pause, go check it out, come back and see if you liked it as much as we did, if you got the same ideas from it that we did, because there's a lot to unpack here, and I thought it was spectacular. I'm struggling. It's so different than the book we reviewed last week, We Have Demons, that Snyder's doing with Greg Capullo. I'm struggling to which one do I like more. I was trying to decide. They're so different. It was hard for me to pick one or the other, so I just decided not to. I think they're both great, but uh, give us your thoughts, Rocky. When you first read Clear, what's your initial impression of the book?
My initial impression of the book is I like it. I like it. It takes place in the future in the year 2052, and it just takes the internet, and it's a new way of looking at new tech, high tech in the internet. What social media might be like in the future, with these veils where the future is where literally people abandon reality. Right now, we're it sort of takes a dystopian view of our obsession with the internet and social media. And in the future, if we're so obsessed with it, we want to abandon our own reality and literally live and allow our social media, allow our iPhones, or essentially we become almost the conduit for social media. We don't need iPhones anymore. We can imagine our own reality through the form of these veils. And it's a very dystopian take in terms of, where our obsession might take us with that we have with social media, and sort of how we live this alternate reality through our iPhones, but through Clear. I mean, in the future, more and more people abandon clarity in lieu of choosing a new reality with these veils. It's like a drug, and there's drug traffickers trading these images, and I love it. It is kind of a horror, and yet it's a very subtle kind of horror. It's a new kind of horrific reality, but it's very subtle how it just creeps up on you. And I'm really impressed with how Scott Snyder has suggested how, if we're not careful, this is a very real possibility, that this sort of dystopian high-tech future that he's portrayed here. I think this is it reminds me that this could be an excellent, almost like an excellent sci-fi thriller that you could watch on Netflix or something. I really enjoyed it. Plus, it's a mixture of crime noir and the different elements with the different settings that are possible, because it deals with it deals with social media in terms of each individual character has their own individual reality like that they like to escape to, and how they perceive the world differently through the lens of these vials or these veils, and these black veils, that these different types of settings that they can be traded on the black market like a drug trafficking trade. It's just fascinating. I just love it. The potential for this is incredible. And I recall one other creator. I can't remember the name, but he made a comment because he had heard Scott Snyder's pitch for this clear way back, and he had commented that he was jealous. He never thought of the idea first, and I think it was Donny Cates actually when he talked about clear, and I
Yeah,
can see
very
it because
well.
it yeah, this is an excellent concept, and I can't wait to talk about it more. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea of it, the subversiveness of it, would lend the story to something great for like an Outer Limits or a Twilight Zone or a Black Mirror episode or something like that, because it is
Yeah.
so subversive, and there's so much to unpack here. You mentioned the crime noir piece, and I talked about that in my spoiler free review, and in the way that he melds the crime noir with this sort of to use your term, dystopian technological sort of setting that they set up in the story. And much like We Have Demons, where I was very impressed with the way that Scott and Greg Capullo were able to meld the sort of faith slash religion aspect with a hard science aspect. I thought that worked really, really well. And now here he is with his next title, and I don't expect this to continue with every single Scott Tober or every single Comixology release that they put out, but I do find it very interesting that the first two they put out have melded two different things that you wouldn't necessarily think go together really well, right? Like you've got over in We Have Demons, like I said, the whole idea of faith or religion working perfectly in tandem with science. And so often when you tell stories that have those two things, they're actually sort of opposed to each other. They're sort of antithetical. And now here we have a story that's, very much crime noir, like you're saying. But you think of crime noir as something that's sort of old school and old fashioned, with the gumshoe detective and the damsel in distress and that sort of thing. Um, but then you're melding that together with this idea of technology that's become ubiquitous, right? Like it's everywhere. To Rocky's point earlier about how not only is technology everywhere, we ourselves are now interfacing with the internet, interfacing with the technology directly. And yeah, it is horror in that it's scary and it's frightening because it's all too real. It's all too much of a possibility. And if there's one thing that crime noir sort of shares with this idea of this ubiquitous technology and it leading down the path of people not caring, if one thing that it shares, it's a cynicism, right? This idea that people have sort of given up. You don't want to necessarily see the world as it is anymore because the world's not a good place anymore. Nobody's happy with the way the world looks. And rather than trying to change it or make it better, we're just going to choose to kind of stick our heads in the sand, or in this case, pull a veil over our faces and see the world as something it's not. So again, it's that idea of melding two things. This the fact that technology has become so commonplace that it's literally a part of us, and we don't even see the world for what it really is. And those two, marrying these two ideas is fascinating to me. So that's one aspect of the story and my favorite aspect of the story, but there's so much more to it. Like you said, just on the face of it, like if you throw out the technological aspect and just read this as a crime noir story, say it was just set in the 40s, and it was the same kind of story, and instead of uh, Detective Dunes, the private investigator Dunes, following a guy who's buying a black veil, he could be following a guy who's buying, I don't know, bootleg alcohol in the Prohibition era, or buying drugs or something like that. You could strip all the technology stuff away and just read it as a crime noir story. It still works. It's still very good. It's still well paced and very well constructed. Then there's the other aspect that I talk about how this is all too real, and Rocky kind of touched on it a little bit. Why it is so scary. we don't have veils right now. We can't interface directly with our eyes and our brains to the internet. We still have to go through an external device. But one thing that we do have that's sort of similar is we all have different perspectives. It appears these days. If you start talking about, politically, people who are conservative versus people who are more liberal, and how they're seeing, even without veils, they're looking at the same thing and seeing something that's very different. Right? It's a matter of
Yeah.
perspective, and we've talked about that at various times on the show. This is a little more literal, where not only are you seeing it from a different perspective, but you're choosing to skin it. I've heard Scott Snyder use that word skin because I think a lot of people know what that is in terms of video games and whatnot. They're choosing to skin their world in a way that allows them to see it in a different way. And I think you mentioned this also, Rocky, what that does to us in the way that we communicate with each other, right? In my mind, it isolates people and it pushes us further away in terms of having relationships because there's less common ground. We're not even, you and I could be
Yeah.
riding on the same bus, we could be on the same train, we could be walking down, the sidewalk in the same direction, and be experiencing something completely different and have less common ground because we're seeing things so differently. There's danger in that. That's a scary thing to look at. So in my mind, this is nearly a perfect comic because Scott Snyder and Francis Manapul are bringing in all these ideas, but you never feel like you're hit over the head with them. It's still character first. It's paced well, and they managed to bring all these elements in and have them play out in a 30-page comic that's illustrated beautifully and colored beautifully by Manapul. And you never I've read it 3 times because each time I read it, I'm picking up on multiple things, and it goes back to the value of of your comic dollar basically. So
Yeah.
I'm just super impressed, and I can't wait to see where this goes. And we haven't even necessarily talked about the story point with Dune's ex-wife, I guess, and the fact that there's actually a crime noir mystery here. I
Yeah.
didn't even mention that. So I mean, masterful job. This may be my favorite thing Scott Snyder's ever written. It really might be like his best comic I've ever read from him.
Yeah.
It's one issue, so it's a little too soon to say that, but what
It's
a
like
masterful first issue.
it's like he's channeling his inner Ed Brubaker. So, and that's a high. I say that as a high compliment because it wouldn't surprise me if Ed Brubaker wrote something similar to this because it just has that crime noir sensibility. So, it's really good. And the lead character, Detective Sam Dunes, uh, uh, I like the fact that instead of it reminds you of the 1940s with the detective. Like in the 1940s, detectives would maybe investigate, would be hired by wives to spy on their husbands to see if their husbands are cheating. But
Yep.
in the future, with the black veil, the black veil, Detective Sam Dunez, or he's hired by this Petal Matters to spy on her husband to see if he's essentially cheating on her by using by by entering the black veil market to try to obtain basically a different image, so he sees something different, so he can have a veil where he can when he looks at his wife he sees somebody else. Like you can see the world differently if you get a different veil. And you can, in the black market, you can get illegal veils that are not registered, and you can be hooked up to like almost, you can see the world through a completely different set of eyes, that whatever you want to pay for. And it's so interesting that Petal, the wife, is just so offended that her husband, her rich businessman husband, would want to see somebody else when he looks at her, and it's almost like a form of cheating. And I just love how that sort of draws in, and that's sort of that's how the story starts off, and just literally like a 1940s detective crime noir epic, but yet it's drawing in all this technology, and all those themes you touched upon are so prevalent and obvious, or perhaps subtle, but how they speak to our problems of today, of being unable to communicate with each other, always wanting to see something different, looking at the same thing but seeing different things. That is so prevalent here. And it's so gut-wrenching that the only two characters that seem to want clarity, to see the world as it is, are the detective and this woman, Petal Matters. And it's like, more and more it's getting, they even alluded to the fact that in the future it's more expensive to see the world clearly. every veil has a clear setting, and some people avoid it, and it's getting more. It's reaching a point where to even see with clarity, to see with no veil, it might cost more money because more and more people are moving away from reality, and it's and there's a wonderful phrase here uh, where Scott Snyder, I think it's excellent writing, where Detective Nunez says, "So here we are, a future that isn't some primal scream of horror, but a billion little sighs, an effing shrug." And I thought,
That
geez,
was
that
my
just
yeah, that was my favorite line as well. Um, and it's after he's taken down to the morgue and he finds out his ex-wife is dead, and he's talking about how you know the end of the world, the apocalypse was always predicted as some like big acute cataclysm. It was going to end in moments and minutes. It was going to be over, or things were going to change forever. And instead, nobody had warned us of this like slow decline that maybe is happening so slowly that you don't realize it until society has slid too far, culture or whatever has slid too far down. Right? He's talking about how things cost more. It takes 3 months to get a washing machine. I guess any of these sounded familiar. Supply chain issues. Like, nobody bothers to watch the news anymore because it's just bad news. So you just put your veil on and you try to live your life as best you can. There doesn't really seem like there's menial jobs anymore. They have robots called WRKSs or works that do that. And the actual global veil market, it accounts for 70% of the world's economy. So it's this self-perpetuating choice to isolate. I'll go back to that again, and then he does say, yeah. So here we are. The future isn't some primal scream of horror, where something happened and there's a zombie apocalypse or a nuclear war and mutated monstrosities from radiation or whatever. No, it's a billion little sighs of people just going, the world's a little bit worse today, but whatever. I'm just going to shrug and put on my Wile E. Coyote Looney Tunes veil and try to be as happy as I can. Like, how sad is that, and how frightening in its realism. But to go back to what I was saying before about sort of being isolated, and the whole thing with Pedal Matters hiring Sam Dunes. She's hiring Sam Dunes to find out if her husband's using black veil, because black veils can't be traced. Like, you don't know that somebody's using a black veil as opposed to a regular veil. You would know that they're not seeing the world as it really is. Black veil, you can see the world in a different way, and people don't know. And she wanted to know for her own clarity. Like, she wanted to know, am I enough? Am I enough for him? But the other thing it goes back to is, like, how does the concept of marriage even exist in a world like this?
exactly.
When you're never looking at your spouse, or why bother to find the one or somebody that you can connect with when you're just gonna skin them to look like something else anyway, which is gonna color the way that you interact with them and the way you feel about them and all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
And
it's
it,
fascinating. But that was my favorite line too. A billion little shrugs, or a billion little sighs, fucking shrug, and then we go into um, Dunes and Petal meeting in his office, which is so like taken right out of a 1940s crime noir movie. It's so fascinating, and obviously they have a connection there. And just like you'll often have the sort of tension between the detective and the damsel in distress in those stories, and I think it's played beautifully. She's rendered beautifully by Francis Manapul, and yeah, they do have that connection where they each are the only other person that they each know that chooses to see the world without a veil. So clearly there's a connection. They fill a pool, but Dune's just ID'd his dead ex-wife on a slab in the morgue. So I don't necessarily think he's having romantic feelings, but there's something there. There's some tension there, and again, it just goes to uh, how masterfully paced and written this issue is. It's so great. But yeah, uh, that billion little sighs and a fucking shrug line is I will remember that comic book line forever.
it
Yeah,
I,
great.
and I do think it's ironic that that the detective's ex-wife, her name is Kendra McHale, and he of course the another Sergeant Collins, I guess was an old former friend of his. You know, let him know that his ex-wife apparently committed suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, which was shocking to him. And it's revealed that apparently his ex-wife graduated from the Department of Connectivity. The
Yep.
Department of Connectivity, and I don't know what the Department of Connectivity is, but it's I hear the word connectivity, and here she's graduated from a department dealing with connections and connectivity in a world that has completely lost its connection to reality. But is so I'm really curious as to is I think that this is building to something that Snyder, that the death of his ex-wife Kendra, that she stumbled upon a secret of some kind, probably about the secret of how maybe these veils work. There was also a talk at the beginning of this comic about a mention of something called the Red War, where the people of America, never really embraced the veil or using the veil until after they lost something called the Red War. So I'm curious as to know maybe what that is. Does that have something to do with things? I like the world building here that Scott Snyder has done in simply one issue. He's got me asking a bunch of questions that I want answers to. I want to know more. And it's not just the fact that everyone likes a good crime drama, but I'm enjoying this future. Ironically enough, I want to get lost in reality in this future, in this fiction. So I'm really enjoying, like I said, this is really it's great to have a comic book like this that is a nice break from the big two once in a while. So this is well done.
Yeah, because there are a lot of tropes here, right? There are some time honored parts of the story that you would expect in crime noir. It certainly seems like Detective Dunes. He knew this Sergeant Collins, so I took it that he used to be a police officer. Clearly, the Sergeant Collins knew Dunes' wife, Kendra, so maybe they were all police officers. I mean, I sort of get the feeling that this Department of Connectivity is might be some kind of law enforcement. Like maybe it's the department that's supposed to regulate veils or something like that. So they do have some sort of kind of law enforcement dictate or authority or something like that. So yeah, there are connections here, which that's a lot of what crime noir is. Connecting the dots between these people and learning why this person did this or that or whatever. And a lot of times it's based on emotion or an affair or a promotion or money or but it all goes back to connections and relationships. And even though this is set in the future, a future that's sort of bleak in a lot of ways, uh, Manapul and Snyder don't forget the crime noir roots to make sure to keep relationships at the forefront of the story. So I
Yeah.
expect all of that to be fleshed out. And you're right, Rocky. The world building's fantastic. Just dropping little lines like that. She's been
Yeah.
doing great at the Department of Connectivity. Oh yeah, the Red War was what you know pushed America over to start using veils. There's so many little just one sentence here or a couple words there that add context to the story, um, that sort of give it texture in
Yeah.
the same way that Manipul's art gives it texture. When I And what's so interesting about Manipul's art, he does have a little bit of a watercolor look to his art. A lot of that has to do with the fact he's colors himself, and you saw the same thing in his flash
Yeah.
work. The first time I saw his work was on Legion of Superheroes, and I loved his line work, but it was a much more clean and polished style, and than we see here. And I used to think, okay, well, not necessarily that he got lazy or sloppy, but maybe he moved over to this looser style because it's faster for him. But what I'm realizing, all the work I've seen him do since Legion is more in this. I think this is actually his natural style, and I think he probably drew Legion. Maybe he was trying to channel a little bit of a DC house style and make it a little cleaner because he was new on the scene and he wanted to be sure that he was putting his best foot forward with the powers that be at DC. But I'm glad that he's a popular enough artist that he can give us this natural style because a clean line work, um, and losing some of the visceralness and the sketchy feeling of the art would be wrong for the story. Even though it's a future like we've talked about, it's not this bright future like you'd see in Star Trek or something. Things are dirty, things are run down, and that's why part of the reason people want to see the world through veils. And when you start talking about a crime noir story, that's something that's very gritty and sort of street level as well. So you do need an artist that brings some of that kind of scritchiness into, that grittiness into his into his line work. And
Well,
also, he follows through with the colors. It's a muted palette, and then on top of that, he's got to be having the time of his life, because when it comes to, okay, I want to draw a coyote, or I want to draw a cartoon mermaid, or I want to draw a big giant monster truck, he can do any of that. He can draw whatever he wants, because you can just say, okay, well, now I'm seeing the world through the eyes of this person who has this particular veil. This, I mean, this project gives him the freedom to draw absolutely anything he wants at any time,
yeah.
which I think is just a whole lot of fun.
And there's a fantastic sequence. There's a motorcycle chase where Detective Dunez is chasing the, I guess, the Black Veil traffickers. And what's great about it is that just before the chase began, one of the hoodlums gave him a needle, gave him a Zad, what they call I guess a Sherazad,
Scheherazade, yeah.
Scheherazade, and essentially what it did was that it was sort of like a boost of Black Veil, or a boost of this veil, and it gave him multiple images of multiple realities, of just different perceptions of different environments that he saw all at once. And the way that that challenged uh, uh, you know the art, I mean, the it was just incredible, because for those that are just listening on the podcast, I mean, you not only do you see a great car chase, but you see his motorcycle, and he's chasing not just the car, but he's chasing a chuck wagon, because you see almost like these shards of glass, and you can see through the different shards of glass a different image, that it's not, it's taking place in different time periods, and different, the settings are there's different settings on the same page during the same car chase. He's doing a good job of conveying for the reader uh, all the different types of essentially new worlds and new settings that one experiences through the veil. And it's very, very well done. It does a great job of conveying to the reader what it must be like to be under the influence of the veil. And that's quite good, because it would be difficult to pull off even in a movie with special effects and what have you. And yet artistically he's done a very good job.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see those different veils go just flying by Sam Dune's vision, especially for somebody who wants to see the world as it really is. You know,
Yeah.
it's about the worst thing that could happen to him. And he mentions that a lot of times when that sort of thing happens, uh, people's brains just can't handle it. They'll pass out, or what have you. So yeah, just another way that the story is enriched by this idea of these veils. So yeah, I was blown away by this. It's so good. It's so different um, than the previous title that we had last week with We Have Demons. The one coming up next week is called Night of the Ghoul, and it has to do with this old horror film that never got finished. And there's a guy that stumbles across the remnants of the original film, and then goes to visit the director of the film in a kind of a mental institution, and things kind of go sideways and crazy from there. So Scott's collaborator on that one is Francesco Francavilla, and they've been collaborating on that for a long time. I think I've heard Scott say that that's actually the oldest of the projects the that's in any of the Comixology titles. So Night of the Ghoul is the name of the movie um, that was written and directed by this T.F. Merritt, um, and he was thinking it was going to be instant classic, and people were going to think about the Ghoul as like people do about Frankenstein or Dracula or whatever. But yeah, it never happened. And so this horror film guy who he's a huge fan of horror films, and he digitizes old horror films to sort of preserve them. That's his kind of his job. And he comes across this remnant of this footage, and he goes to talk to the writer director, and things kind of go sideways from there with the Ghoul and whatnot. So um, I think it's again a great choice for collaborator. Frank art is very very good. If anybody's not familiar, but you're a more mainstream guy, maybe you read the recent issue of Joker that Frank did with James Tynion, and you'll see how well suited his art is for horror. He did a lot of the Afterlife with Archie books, so that's another thing we got to give Scott a lot of credit for. He's putting out all these new original stories, and to me, the stuff's so much better than any of his recent DC work. And I
Oh yes.
and again, I haven't talked to Scott about it, but I feel like so much of that has to do with the fact that he's having fun, he's passionate about it, he's so much more invested because he owns all these properties, 100%. Um, and so there's nobody over his shoulder saying no, you can't do that. We've got to protect our $1 billion IP. The sky's the limit, and that sort of creative freedom I think engenders excitement, and you push the envelope. And so I think Scott's done a great job in choosing which artists to collaborate with on each project so far, because We Have Demons, again, was excellent with his longtime collaborator, Greg Capullo. Francis Manapul, perfect for Clear. Blew me away. Like, I'm a fan of Francis, so when Scott said he was doing something with him, Clear, I heard the idea. I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty good. I'm pretty interested in that. I was in no way prepared for how good Clear is. Like, it completely blew me away. And then I think it'll be the same thing with Night of the Ghoul with Francesco Francavilla. So highly recommend it. Go get your Comixology subscription so you can check out these Comixology originals as well as all the other Comixology originals. There's some great stuff on there from writers like Mark Bernardin, Chip Zdarsky. There's just a lot of really, really good stuff on there, in addition to what Scott's doing, plus all your traditional DC and Marvel and Image and all that other kind of stuff. So it's a great, great value. So definitely check out Clear. Yeah, it's one of the best things I've read in quite some time. So as we're wrapping up here, Rocky, any last thoughts on Clear? Anything else you want to add?
Uh, just that I really hope people pick this up. I'm quite enjoying this. It's well worth it. This is You're getting good bang for your buck here. This is good quality stuff, and I'm going to be picking this up when it comes out. I wish I could get a physical copy of this. I would love to be able to buy a physical copy of this, but this this is going to be I can this is a setting up a whole new world that within 6 issues we can wrap up this storyline, I'm guessing, and then we can have ongoing stories which that are all self-contained, all crime noir detective stories set in this world of Clear. I think this is Scott Snyder setting up a great little world here, a great universe that we can all enjoy for a long time into the future, as long as Scott Snyder continues to want to gift us with this new world.
Yeah, that's another thing I should say. I mentioned Dark Horse is the one that has the rights to do print copies of all the Comixology stuff, and Scott's already said this stuff will be in print eventually. Here's the great thing about the books he's doing with Comixology: he will release them in print in whatever format best suits that story. So, for example, he's already said We Have Demons is going to be kind of a traditional print comic release where it'll have alternate covers and variants and whatnot for retailers. Clear might come out as a whole trade paperback. Some things might be oversized. Some things might come out as a square bound, or it won't be the traditional 8.5 by 11 vertical. Maybe it goes horizontal, or different things like that. So whatever the best way to present the material is how he's going to do it. So I look forward to finding out how they experiment with that kind of stuff as well. So again, everybody, go check out Clear. Check out last week's title, We Have Demons. Again, if you were to go to buy the singles from Amazon, you'd pay $10, but you can go and get their subscription and be able to read both, plus all the upcoming stuff for only $8.99. So that's definitely the way to go. So that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Hope you all go and check out Clear. Hope you got a chance to listen to our DC Spotlight, where Rocky and I covered all the DC books from this week in great detail. For the other books, check out our New Comics Wednesday episode, where we covered everything spoiler free. And make sure you head over to YouTube. If you're listening to us just on the audio only podcast, head over to YouTube, do a search for Comic Boom ! That's Rocky's channel, where there's tons of great content. Give him a subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you know when he has new content coming out. Conversely, if you're checking this out on YouTube and you want to listen to any of the other episodes that we put out on the Comic Source, or go back and listen to the thousands plus episodes we have in the archive with interviews and convention coverage and all that, just do a search for the Comic Source on your favorite podcast app on your device, or we're on Google Podcasts, we're on uh, Spotify, we're on iTunes, we're everywhere. So anywhere you can find podcasts, you'll find the Comic Source. So once again, everybody, thanks for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.
Talk to you later.